Braunau am Inn, Austria, a quiet border town shrouded in mist. The year is 1889, but our story begins earlier in the silence of a graveyard. Zoom in on a specific plot. It holds four tiny coffins. Gustav, Ida, Otto, Edmund, four children who never reached adulthood. Four souls erased from time. We all know the name of the one who survived, Adolf Hitler. But consider the terrifying mathematics of fate. What if the diphtheria had been more efficient? What if the measles had struck 1 year later? History hangs by a thread of bacteria and fever. This is not merely a biography of a tyrant. This is a forensic psychological examination of a home defined by loss. A house where the cradle was merely a waiting room for the coffin. To understand the psychology of the chosen one, we must first excavate the ghost that haunted his nursery. The monster was not born in a vacuum. He was born into a graveyard. The timeline starts in May 1885. Adolf Hitler, a man encased in the stiff uniform of a customs official, validates his third marriage. His bride is Clara. She is 24 years old. She is humble, pious, and anxious to please a husband who speaks in commands rather than requests. For a brief moment, the house in Braunau feels like a home. In May 1885, Gustav is born. He is the firstborn son. He is vital, loud, and healthy. Alois, usually cold and distant, feels a flicker of dynastic pride. A year later, in September 1886, Ida arrives, a daughter. Now there are two, the nursery is full. The future seems secure, but biology is cruel in the 19th century. It is now the winter of 1887. A shadow crosses the threshold. Diphtheria. It is an aggressive bacterial infection that forms a thick, gray coating in the throat. It suffocates the victim slowly. It strikes Gustav first. The parents watch helplessly. Medical science in 1887 offers no salvation, only waiting. On December 9th, 1887, Gustav's breathing stops. He is 2 years old. The silence in the house is deafening, but the reaper is not finished. The bacteria has already jumped to the crib of little Ida. Clara barely has time to wash the burial clothes of her son before her daughter begins to gasp. The panic is absolute. 25 days later, January 2nd, 1888, Ida dies. She is 1 year old. In less than a month, the nursery is empty. Clara stands in a silent room. She is not just grieving. She is psychologically dismantled. The foundation of her motherhood is shattered. She learns a lesson that will poison the air for the next child. To love is to lose. The universe is hostile. This trauma locks into her nervous system, preparing the soil for the suffocating, fearful obsession she will later project onto Adolf. The earth in the Braunau cemetery is fresh. It has been turned twice in the span of weeks. Now it must be turned a third time. The year is 1887. In the midst of this relentless season of dying, another child enters the narrative. Otto. He is born into a house that already smells of beeswax candles and funeral incense. He is a ghost before he is even fully a boy. Otto is the third child of Alois and Clara. But unlike Gustav, who was vibrant, Otto is fragile from the first breath. He arrives in a home where the parents are already exhausted by grief. Clara looks at this new infant not with the joy of a new mother, but with the terrified scrutiny of a woman expecting the worst. She scans his skin for rashes. She listens to his breathing for the rattle of fluid. She is no longer just a mother. She is a sentry guarding a fortress that has already been breached. But the biological lottery is unforgiving. Otto survives for only a few days. The specific medical cause is lost to the chaos of the time. Perhaps hydrocephalus, perhaps the same bacterial cloud that took his siblings. It does not matter to history. What matters is the psychological impact. Otto dies in the autumn of 1887. Now pause and look at the psychological landscape of this family. 3 children, 3 births, 3 burials. All within a span of roughly 3 years. Alois, the father, reacts with a wall of icy detachment. He puts on his uniform. He goes to the customs house. He drinks at the tavern. He decides that emotions are a weakness he cannot afford. He begins to view his wife not as a partner, but as a failure, a woman who cannot keep his dynasty alive. This coldness will later become the defining feature of his relationship with Adolf. For Clara, the death of Otto is the final lock on a mental prison. She internalizes a catastrophic belief: her womb is cursed. She believes God is punishing her, perhaps for marrying her cousin, perhaps for some unknown sin. She spends her days at the graveside. The town of Braunau watches her, the woman in black, the mother of dead things. When she prays, she does not ask for prosperity. She begs for survival. This is the atmosphere of the house in 1888. It is a vacuum of anxiety waiting to be filled. The stage is perfectly set. The desperate need for a savior has been manufactured by tragedy. The throne is empty, and the next child to sit on it will absorb all of this concentrated, terrified energy. It is the 20th of April, 1889, a Saturday before Easter. The air in Braunau is damp. Upstairs in the inn, Clara screams, but this time the silence does not follow. A cry erupts. Adolf is born. He is sickly, pale, and fearful, but he breathes. For Clara, this is not just a birth, it is a resurrection. After 3 coffins, God has finally granted a reprieve. She pours every ounce of her shattered soul into this boy. She does not just love him, she worships his survival. She creates a bubble where he is the center of the universe, the golden child who defied the family curse. But the universe disrupts this fantasy. In March 1894, another son is born, Edmund. Suddenly the spotlight shifts. Adolf is 5 years old. For the first time, he is not the sole recipient of his mother's desperate affection. He is dethroned. He watches with a simmering, childish rage as Clara nurses the new infant. He is sent away to play while the fragile Edmund is coddled. This is the first psychological fracture. The narcissism of the chosen survivor is challenged by reality. Adolf retreats into himself. He becomes moody, resentful, acting out at school to reclaim the attention he feels is his birthright. The rivalry lasts for 6 years. 6 years of normal brotherhood in a house of abnormal ghosts. But the curse of the Hitler surname is patient. It is February 1900. The family is now living in Leonding. The winter is harsh. Measles, a common childhood plague, sweeps through the village. It bypasses Adolf. It finds Edmund. The scene repeats itself like a macabre play. The fever spikes, the rash spreads. Edmund, only 6 years old, fights for breath. On February 2nd, 1900, Edmund dies. The cycle of trauma completes another rotation. Adolf is now 11 years old. He is old enough to understand the permanence of the grave. He stands by the coffin of his younger brother. He sees his parents broken once again. Alois retreats into deeper silence. Clara collapses into hysteria. But observe Adolf closely in this moment. A terrifying psychological transformation occurs. With Edmund gone, the rival is removed. Adolf is once again the only son. The golden child status is restored, but now it is calcified by death. He absorbs a dangerous lesson. He is invincible. Death takes the others, Gustav, Ida, Otto, Edmund, but it refuses to take him. He begins to believe in a dark providence. He is not just lucky, he is chosen. The death of Edmund does not humble him, it inflates him. He looks at the cemetery and sees a scorecard where he is the only winner. The survivor guilt morphs into a messianic complex. The shadow of his brother is buried, and the monster begins to rise in the light. The years between 1900 and 1900 mark the incubation of the pathology. The house in Leonding, and later Linz, settles into a terrifying equilibrium. Edmund is in the ground. Gustav, Ida, and Otto are distant memories. Adolf remains. He is the sole vessel into which Clara Hitler pours a decade of accumulated grief and terrified love. Psychologists call this the replacement child syndrome. The surviving child is not loved for who he is loved for who he must be. He is unconsciously tasked with living the lives of the dead siblings. He must be special enough to justify his survival. Inside the home, the atmosphere is thick with suffocating velvet. Clara does not merely raise Adolf, she curates him. She anticipates his needs before he speaks. She shields him from every minor discomfort. If he fails a test at school, she blames the teacher. If he is rude to a neighbor, she excuses his temperament as artistic sensitivity. She constructs a reality where Adolf is the sun and the rest of the world is merely orbiting debris. This overindulgence is not kindness, it is a trauma response. She is so terrified of losing him that she refuses to let him experience the necessary pains of growing up. She acts as a buffer between him and the sharp edges of the world. Consequently, Adolf develops a personality structure that is fundamentally brittle. He learns that he is exempt from the rules that govern ordinary people. When he walks through the streets of Linz, he does not see himself as the son of a civil servant. He sees himself as a misunderstood genius, a prince in exile. The chosen one complex hardens into a pathological narcissism. He cannot handle criticism because criticism implies he is flawed. And in Clara's eyes, he is perfect. The only check on this growing megalomania is his father, Alois. Alois represents the reality principle. He is harsh, pragmatic, and brutally unimpressed by his son's vague, artistic daydreams. He demands Adolf become a civil servant. Adolf resists, not with logical argument, but with the petulant stubbornness of a boy who knows his mother will intervene. The house becomes a battlefield between the father's tyranny and the mother's enabling devotion. But then, fate intervenes again to protect the monster's ego. In January 1903, Alois Hitler collapses in a tavern and dies. The barrier is removed. The reality principle is dead. Now there is no one left to tell Adolf no. He is 14 years old, the man of the house, adored by a mother who is willing to bankrupt herself to feed his delusions. He drops out of school. He spends his days wandering the opera, drawing grandiose buildings, and living in a fantasy world subsidized by his mother's pension. The tragedy is complete. The dead siblings created the void. The mother filled it with obsession, and the father's death removed the lid. The mechanism is built. The engine of the dictator is now running, fueled by the conviction that he is destined for greatness simply because he is the one who survived. There is one final character in this tragedy who is often forgotten. In January 1896, the last child is born, Paula. She is the only sibling other than Adolf to survive infancy, but her survival does not shift the center of gravity in the household. By 1896, the hierarchy is absolute. Adolf is the son, Paula is merely a satellite. She grows up in the long, cold shadow of her brother. She witnesses the temper tantrums, the coddling, and the distortion of reality, but she is never the protagonist. She is the silent witness to the making of the monster. As they grow older, the dynamic solidifies. Adolf treats Paula not as an equal, but as a subject. When he leaves for Vienna to pursue his delusions of artistic grandeur, he ghosts her. When he ascends to power, he commands her to change her name to Wolf to maintain his privacy. She lives a life of enforced mediocrity, working as a secretary while her brother ignites the world. Yet, she never rebels. The psychological conditioning of the Hitler household is too strong. She accepts her role as the insignificant one. Cut to May 1945. The bunker is silent. The dictator is dead. American intelligence officers track down Paula. She is living in a small cabin in Berchtesgaden. They expect to find a monster in female form, or perhaps a victim who hates her oppressor. They find neither. They find a confused, weeping woman who still speaks of her brother with a terrifying, childlike reverence. She describes him not as the architect of the Holocaust, but as the boy who once stared out the window in Leonding. Even after the ruin of Europe, she cannot break the spell of the Golden Child. Paula dies in 1960, taking the final secrets of that kitchen table to her grave. She is the closing parenthesis of the family story. She represents the banality of the tragedy. While Adolf consumed the world's attention, Paula embodied the silence of the domestic graveyard that birthed him. She was the one who survived, yet she never really lived. She was simply the last ghost waiting to fade. We return now to the cemetery in Braunau. The mist has cleared, but the stones remain. Read the names one last time. Gustav, Ida, Otto, Edmund. 4 children, 4 distinct genetic possibilities. 4 lives that were extinguished before they could speak. History is often taught as a series of inevitable events. a grand march of dates and battles. But this story proves that history is fragile. It is biological. It hangs on the durability of a white blood cell or the temperature of a fever. If the diphtheria bacterium had been slightly less aggressive in 1887, Gustav would have lived. Adolf would have been the second son, perhaps a resentful younger brother, perhaps a mediocre painter, but likely not the Führer. The energy of the mother's grief would have been diluted. The vacuum would not have existed. The monster was not sent from hell. He was manufactured by the random cruelty of nature and the broken psychology of a grieving mother. The tragedy is not just that millions died because of him. The tragedy is that he was created by the death of innocence. The mechanism that built him, trauma, narcissism, and the desperate need to replace what is lost, still exists in human psychology today. The graves are closed, but the lesson is open. We must watch the quiet corners of our homes, for that is where the future is written. Do not look away from the uncomfortable truths of our past. To understand the darkness is the only way to guard the light. Subscribe to this channel, share this archive. Memory is our only defense against the repetition of history.